Howdy, hi everyone, this is Eugene, Custom Built Motorized Bicycles.com. Okay, you got your motorized bike, you want to make it look spiffy, make it look hot. You can change the forks. You ever think about that? Now here's a couple of different ones. You've got the Springer fork here on the left. You've got the telescopic fork like you'd see on a mountain bike in the middle. And then you've got the knee action Springer fork that you see on a lot of the retro bikes there. Be sure and check the link down below. I'll show you where you can get the forks that I'm showing you here today and have your motorized bike looking all spiffy and neat. One type of fork you do want to avoid at all costs, in my opinion, is the old school Monarch fork. These things are not strong enough for motorized use. If you look underneath this silver cap here, there's two thin plates of metal that the forks are just barely tack welded to. I had a set buckle on me once. I was only going 5 miles an hour. So do not go with the Monarch, the old style Monarch fork. The Springer forks are okay for most use. They are a little lightweight nowadays. They're not as heavy duty as they were back in the day. If you're just going to be putting around going slow, the Springer forks are fine. But like I said, you want to build your racer and go fast. You want to go long distances and really, give it some punishment. I don't recommend the knee action Springer. I recommend you go with the telescopic fork like you have on a mountain bike, or the double spring Springer fork, the better style of the Monarch fork. One thing you want to be careful about when you purchase your forks is you get the correct size steering tube. The majority of beach cruisers have 1-inch threaded headsets. So you want to get a fork with a 1-inch threaded steering tube on it. As well, you want to measure the head tube, that's the front tube here on the bike that all this stuff goes into, and make sure that your steering tube is long enough. And quite often you will have to do some trimming. So we'll go into trimming here later. Okay, first thing you got to do, you're going to put the new forks on, you got to take the old forks off. Hopefully you're not all rusted and seized up inside the steering tube. Most beach cruisers nowadays, you need a 6mm Allen wrench hex key to get things loose there. Loosen the nut there that goes down into the steering tube. There's an expander nut down there inside. If the bike has been sitting for several years or whatever, you may have some rust in there, and you might have to loosen up the locking nut that my fingers are covering up and squirt you some penetrating oil, some WD, or make your own rust-busting solution with some automatic transmission fluid and acetone mixed together. Work it all down in there, let it soak, give that top bolt some love taps with a hammer, not too hard, you don't want to booger the threads up. And once you get your steering tube loose, go ahead and pull it out there. There is the expander nut, and as you tighten it up, it expands. That's what makes it tight. Okay, after you've got the front wheel off, we need to work on getting the lock nut loose. Now here's how I get the lock nut loose. Of course, have the wheel off and get my big ass wrench on it here. Put me a piece of wood between the forks, slap it up against the frame. And once you get that lock nut to get about a half a turn on it, you're pretty much good to go. On the newer bikes, I don't know why, but there in China, somebody really tightens the hell out of those lock nuts. They just go overboard. You've got a lock washer underneath the lock nut. That lock washer has a little tooth in it, a little pin that goes into a slot that's cut into the threads. Make note of that. When you put it back on, you want to make sure you get that pin in the slot in the threaded part of the steering tube. Now the next part that I'm unscrewing is called the adjustable race. That's what presses against the bearing. Here at here on the fork is the crown race. The crown race sits on the crown of the forks there that I'm pointing at. Quite often with your new forks, you do not have the crown race installed. So what you're going to have to do is get your hammer and your chisel and knock this bad boy off. I'm going to show you how we do that. If you're going to want to reuse the forks, I recommend you get you a block of wood, set it down. That way we can protect the threads. Get you a punch or a chisel out, big screwdriver. Get your big freaking hammer, and you're going to give it some love taps. Tap a little bit on one side, then turn the fork around. Tap it a little bit more on the other side. Take your time, give it some good heavy licks, and you're going to knock that crown race right off. Okay, so with your new fork, You want to measure everything up and make sure that your steering tube, number one, is long enough. Hopefully you checked all that out before you bought it, didn't you? Otherwise you're going to feel kind of stupid. So you got the head tube here. You want to measure it. And now that we know that our steering tube is long enough, we need to see where we need to trim it, if we do indeed need to trim it here. Go ahead and once you get your bearing race on, put everything in there, eyeball it, measure it. Be sure and take into account you're going to put the adjustable race, any clamp that goes to the front part of your fork, your lock washer, and your locking nut on it, and then decide how much of the steering tube you need to cut off. So for demonstration here, I'm marking where I want to cut off on this particular steering tube here. You've got your mark. Now what we need to do so we can clean the threads up after we cut it, we want to go ahead and put the adjustable race, the part that screws onto the threads, put that on, screw it all the way down, make sure it's good and tight all the way down, and then you need to decide, you're going to use a hacksaw or you're going to use a power tool. If you use a power tool, be careful that your angle grinder does not hit that adjustable race, that it doesn't vibrate and come against your cutting blade, because if it does, that thing's spinning about 13,000 RPMs. That adjustable race will shoot off of there like it came out of a shotgun. So be careful. You want to make sure you get a good straight cut all the way across. Get your file out, clean up any boogers you got on it, bevel the edge. Then you want to slowly remove the race and use the race, the threads in it, to clean the male threads on the steering tube. Work it back and forth, nice and slow, and voila! You now have the part cut the way you needed it. You've cleaned your threads. Alright, so next up I'm going to show you how we're going to put the crown race on your new set of forks. I've got a big piece of pipe here that's the right size, that slips over it. I get my hammer or my fine adjustment tool, give it a few love taps. You want to take it slow. You do want to make sure that you get the crown race pressed down all the way. Take your time, check your work. Here I got it a little bit at an angle, even with the pipe. So I'm going to take my punch here, give it a couple of taps. It's kind of hard to get it to rest just on the edge, but take your time. And there you go. See, there I got it straight. Now I'm going to use my pipe, give it a couple of love taps, get it seated all the way down. Okay, we're ready to put the forks on the bike. You've got some grease in your bearing cups, the bearing race there. You've got your bearing in the top race. You've got your bearing on the bottom one. Everything is greased up. The adjustable race, the one that screws in, the little cone side, is going to go down. That's what holds the bearings in place and keeps the forks from flopping around, the steering tube and the like, from flopping around inside the headset. Get it nice and snug. You don't want to get it too tight. You want to get it as tight as you can get it to where you still have nice and easy travel, smooth turning on the forks, and grab the bottom of the forks, try to move it back and forth. Make sure that you have no play, otherwise you will need to tighten your bearings up. So on this Springer fork here, we've got the support piece with the clamp. That is going to go on the steering tube, the threaded part. Push it all the way down. Next, I'm going to put my locking washer. It has the tooth in it. Make sure you get the tooth aligned with the slot in the steering tube, the threaded part of the steering tube. Then goes our lock nut. Get that on nice and snug. Give it a little bit of a crank with your big ass wrench. Then we're ready to tighten up the clamp on the fork that goes to the front springs there. Tighten it up with your Allen wrench. Now, when you put your handlebars on, let's do a little bit of preventative work here. Put some grease in the expansion nut, the jam nut there. You want to get a good amount of grease on the threads. You want to get a good amount of grease on the threads that go into the expander nut. You want to get grease all over the expander nut. Get grease where the expander nut rubs against the stem. And put you a nice little dab of grease inside of the steering tube where everything goes. That way a couple of years from now when you want to take your handlebar stem off, you're not going to have such a hard time doing it. Check the link down below. I'll show you where you can buy the forks that I'm talking about. You can get a good deal on them. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Click subscribe. Check out my other videos. Thanks again. Take care.